Hello and welcome back to the Chargers Check-In. My name is Cecilia, and this week we are here to preview the Raiders game. It's another Navy uniform game, which is really exciting. I know how much you guys liked that. And there's also, believe it or not, good news on the injury front for the Chargers. Omarion Hampton could play this weekend. He could be back. They opened up his 21-day practice window, and he did practice. But we're going to have to keep an eye on the injury report just to be sure, because they don't have to have him play this weekend. Otito Ogbonnia's window was also open to return. That could be an impact on defense. I think more so an impact on special teams if he can return. And the Chargers are relatively healthy outside of that, so there's not too much there for the first time all year. On the Raiders side, again, not too much going on there, but Ashton Jeanty did get hurt last game. He left the game with an ankle injury and he didn't return, so it's not entirely clear if he'll be back. I would guess that he probably will be, but we'll have to keep an eye on the injury report for that. And other than that, real quick in Chargers news, apparently the Chargers tried to get Dameon Pierce, the running back from Houston, but the Chiefs ended up getting him. He was offered a spot on the Chargers active roster, and he chose the Chiefs practice squad. So in theory, they could still be negotiating, but it looks like the Chargers are outbid on that one, which is unfortunate because I think he could be an impact in the return game. Don't know how he is actually as a running back. In that room, yeah, he probably doesn't want to compete with Omarion Hampton and Kamani Vidal, but I admit I don't really want to see him on the Chiefs. Okay, we need to talk about the state of the Raiders before we can understand how the Chargers are going to beat them. So the Raiders are not in a good situation. They're in one of the most unenviable situations in the league. I think you could argue the Jets maybe are in a worse situation, but the Jets, they don't have their quarterback, but they at least have a bunch of first-round picks now. The Raiders, they chose not to trade Max Crosby, and they don't have a lot going forward. So let's get into how they got there. They've had 3 head coaches since 2022. Mark Davis is obviously a great businessman. He moved to Vegas for a reason. I don't know if he is a good NFL owner. Well, I know that he's not a good NFL owner. I'm sure you guys will remember that they hired Tom Telesco in 2024, who the Chargers had just fired after 10 years. And Tom Telesco immediately messed up the quarterback in the draft by assuming that someone would be available for him, and was instead forced to take Brock Bowers, who obviously is a fantastic player, very much worth that very, very high first-round pick, but you can't make up for Aiden O'Connell with Brock Bowers. That's not going to be good enough. So they didn't have their quarterback. Tom Telesco and Mark Davis, they kind of made the classic mistake of listening to the players and going, yeah, let's hire the interim coach. Let's hire Antonio Pierce. Because for the players, they're like, well, he's better than Josh McDaniels. And it's like, yeah, anyone would be better than Josh McDaniels. That doesn't mean you hire the guy with no coordinator experience, and who wasn't really on a trajectory to be a head coach for at least another few years. So they made what was a very obviously bad decision. They went with the exciting thing. Then they bring in Tom Brady as a part owner, hoping he can help identify a quarterback of the future, act as a scout, act as a mentor to that quarterback, and help with development. They fire Antonio Pierce, fire Tom Telesco, 2 guys who never should have been hired in the first place. I was laughing very hard when they hired Tom Telesco after the Chargers fired him, and things start to fall apart. Devontae Adams requests a trade. They finally land on John Spytek as their GM and Pete Carroll as their head coach. It has not gone well, and that doesn't mean that I think their drafts have been bad. I think Spytek has overall done fine. Obviously, he missed on Geno Smith, which I would argue that they missed on Ashton Jeanty more by taking Ashton Jeanty when they could have taken some really good offensive linemen at that point, and now Jeanty can't really do anything because of the offensive line. It's not a good situation, and Pete Carroll was supposed to come in and be a floor raiser and set some expectations, get players excited and moving in the right direction, and he just hasn't succeeded in doing that. They trade a 3rd-round pick for Geno Smith. At the time, it feels like a steal because you're like, well, he's an average quarterback, but only a 3rd-round pick for your quarterback is great. His contract isn't that bad. But then as soon as he gets to Vegas, he becomes one of the worst quarterbacks in the league, behind one of the worst offensive lines in the league. So they draft Ashton Jeanty, neglect their offensive line, and now they are 2-9, last in the AFC West. And obviously, in the AFC West, even if they were 500, that wouldn't be good enough. When the Chiefs are third in the division, yeah, you're in a tough situation. At the trade deadline, they chose not to trade Max Crosby, which I was very glad to see because I think that would have been a great move on their part. They did trade Jacoby Myers. They're looking at a top 5 pick in the draft again, but make no mistake, Pete Carroll wants to win because he is on the hot seat now. He was not hired to be the coach for the next 10 to 15 years. He's too old for that. And so, he was hired to turn them around right away, and he's already on the hot seat. Just fired Chip Kelly, the highest paid offensive coordinator in the NFL for some reason. Like he was, paid like a head coach, like a lower end head coach, but pretty insane. They fired the special teams coordinator a few weeks ago. I hope they choose not to fire Pete Carroll. The reasoning on their end would be, well, we're already paying 2 people to not be the head coach, and we're already paying Chip Kelly to not be the offensive coordinator, but obviously it'd be best for the rest of the AFC West if they let Pete Carroll stay and kind of delay that reset. So that's been their problem. They're trying to reset, and they just haven't been able to. With that groundwork being laid, let's get into what the Chargers need to do to beat the Raiders this weekend. So the Chargers are going to show up healthy, they're going to show up pissed off, and that is how I want a Harbaugh team to show up. This game could help put the fun back in the game with a chance to beat a division rival at home. And, knowing that the Raiders are already down, I think it can be a very motivating week, especially after their performance in Jacksonville. That being said, let's get into how to beat the Raiders on the offensive side. So the Raiders offensive coordinator now is their quarterbacks coach, Greg Olsen. It is hard to say how play calling will change. It will be called how Pete Carroll wants. He fired Chip Kelly for a reason. Clearly there are changes he wanted to see made. I would guess that he probably devotes a little bit more to the quick game, the quick passing game, try to protect Geno a little bit better as opposed to, sometimes you see them max protect with 2 receivers running routes that don't get them open right away, or mesh routes where you're like, that this needs time to develop and they don't have time. I don't think they'll change anything too drastic. They'll probably just want to get the ball to Brock Bowers as much as possible. And the game plan is probably going to run through him, I would guess. Secondarily, it would run through Ashton Jeanty if he is healthy enough to play. So previously, they've been using Brock Bowers as a wide receiver 1 effectively. He's often lined up on the outside. Ashton Jeanty was getting a lot of passes and not nearly enough runs just because they have a bad offensive line and they can't block it up for him. The offensive line is a bad situation. The way they handled Jackson Powers-Johnson was so weird, and not speaking highly of him at the podium, and now he's hurt, and it's just a weird situation. They aren't great in pass protection, but I think their run blocking, or lack thereof, is really what has stopped this offense in their tracks, because, like I said, you invest in Ashton Jeanty, and then you don't invest in the things that will make him work for you. Jeanty is still a great player. He left the game with an ankle injury. I'm going to guess that he's going to be back. Still worth checking the injury report, but I'm going to guess that he's going to play. If they can get the ball in his hands, he will probably have a few good runs. Once he gets his feet going, if he can get to the line of scrimmage without contact, he is absolutely liable to run through people for 10 yards. If Jeanty isn't there, that's going to be a big problem for the Raiders offense. So the Chargers do have some of their guys back on defense. Deshaun Hand, Khalil Mack, they should be strong against the run. Hopefully Denzel Perryman can have a good game. They need to get contact behind the line though, because that's what's been killing the rushing attack for Ashton Jeanty. Contact behind the line before he can get his feet going, before he can get some momentum. He has great contact balance, but if you can stop him before he gets going, I think that's something that he's going to be pretty helpless against. And if you look up Jeanty's stats, you're going to see, 3.6 yards per carry, and you're going to go, the rookie's not that great. But if you actually watch the film, trust me, that is an impressive stat line considering the offensive line. In terms of the passing game, Brock Bowers doesn't have a super impressive stat sheet, but since getting healthy again, he's looked pretty good. He's a great route runner, can make people miss, reads defenses brilliantly, can just run right through people for an extra few yards. He is the biggest problem on the offensive side. Trey Tucker is developing well. He has the most touchdowns, so definitely someone to watch out for in the red zone particularly. Michael Mayer stepped up in Bowers' absence. I'm curious what kind of role he'll have now that Bowers is back. He hasn't had a significant role, but he's been someone they look to on certain third down situations. The strange thing is they took Jack Betch in the second round, and they don't seem super interested in involving him on the offense. I know Chargers fans are like, how come we don't involve Trey Harris more? We used a second round pick on him. Well, for context, he has 20 targets in a much more talented and crowded receiver room. Jack Betch has 12 targets all year and 8 catches. That's very strange considering where he was taken. He's a big, strong, contested catch guy. He can get yards after the catch, and it just feels like a serious mishandling of him. And I'm wondering if that's one of the reasons that Pete Carroll fired Chip Kelly, is that he wants to get the ball into Brock Bowers' hands as much as possible, actually hand the ball off to Jeanty, even if it doesn't work right away, and get the ball in the young receiver's hand. To me, that's a no-brainer kind of change. So that could absolutely change with Greg Olsen as the play caller. This game has to be a get-right game for the Chargers' defensive line if they want to come out with a win. They need to keep Ashton Jeanty's carries low. The Raiders have been really resistant to use Jeanty later in the game because it doesn't work out early in the game because the blocking's not there, and so they tend to go away from it as they start to fall behind in the score, and that's something that the Chargers can take advantage of. Get Greg Olsen feeling discouraged about running the ball, especially up the middle, and so that's going to come down to Deshaun Hand, Naquan Jones. Thule and Owe absolutely need to get after Geno Smith. Geno Smith has more sacks than Justin Herbert, and obviously we know that's saying something. Khalil Mack tends to have historic performances against the Raiders. It's his former team. Maybe that's why. Something to look forward to. That the year that Brandon Staley got fired, Khalil Mack, he still got like 6 sacks in one game or something like that, which was crazy. But yeah, sacks are going to be really important. Getting pressures. Geno Smith throws a lot of interceptions, so the more pressures you get, the more opportunities for that we can have. There are really no players on this offensive line, especially now that JPJ is out, that can justify anything less than a great game from this defensive line. They absolutely have it in them. Khalil Mack is going to come back pissed off 100%. If you can get sacks, especially on second and third down, those kinds of sacks, they're really good for field position, and I think good field position and time of possession could mean getting to run the ball more, especially in the second half, and that could mean protecting Herbert. You can't sack Herbert if he's not the one with the ball, and that's as obvious as that sounds. I think getting sacks significantly correlates with being able to run the ball. So that's going to be on the defensive line. I think an important point to note for the rest of the defense is we got to look at how the linebackers are going to do in coverage. Brock Bowers is by far the most important receiver to shut down. He's more often than not in the middle of the field. And even Trey Tucker at times, they put him in these routes going all the way across the field to test the coverage. And especially when you run the kind of coverage that the Chargers do, that's going to be kind of a communication test. So I'm curious to see how that goes. They've been really up and down defending the pass in the middle of the field this year. What I would like to see them do is blitz more. I would like to see them blitz from the linebacker position, from the corner position. The safety position, have Derwin James get in there and blitz. I think that would be great for their confidence. I think that would be great for the sense of the defense getting back out there and having fun, playing physical. And that's the main game plan change that I would like to see from Jesse Minter. Let's talk about how to beat the Raiders defense. There are 2 notable names on the Raiders defense, at least to me, and that is the cornerback, Eric Stokes, and Max Crosby. Obviously Max Crosby. It's always Max Crosby, right? And, the roster around him's not great. It'll be interesting to see what receiver they see as the biggest threat. I would guess it's Ladd McConkey. That's probably the one you want to put your best corner on. To me, it's like, well, then we're probably going to have a big Keenan game. They're weak at covering the middle of the field. That could be an Aronde Gadsden game. I really would like to see Trey Harris and Quentin Johnston both get more involved. I think the yak potential needs to be taken advantage of, and we need to see what we have in Trey Harris. I think that's important for his development. But Max Crosby is someone that Herbert has said, this is a player that you always have to keep track of. You have to know where he is on the field in order to function, because he's that much of a game wrecker. And he's not just a great pass rusher. He also has incredible run defense. I think he's the best defensive end overall in the game. Obviously, Myles Garrett is better at getting after the passer, but there's a very valid correlation between him and Myles Garrett. You take the paycheck and you stay with your team, and you get to be a part of a losing organization in the later years of your prime. And, in some ways it's unfortunate, but at the same time, it's like, if Max Crosby's going to be in the AFC West, I am glad that he is somewhat neutralized by being on the Raiders. But make no mistake, he's going to get after Justin Herbert. It's not clear who's going to be playing left tackle. It could be Jamari Sawyer. That's who it seems to be. Could be Trevor Penning, Bobby Hart, but whoever it is going to need serious help. We're going to need Tucker Fisk out there. I would like to see Will Dissly out there as well. That's something I've talked about. I think that would be a really good thing. But that's the biggest adjustment we need to see from Greg Roman coming off of the bye is we can't leave tackles on an island. You can't do that. I want to see Tucker Fisk out there at least half of the offensive snaps because it's too important to protect Herbert, and Max Crosby is too good. You know, he needs to be chipped, he needs to be doubled. Even if it were Joe Alt out there, I would still want him chipped and doubled sometimes, not at as high of a rate. I'm sure you guys remember when, you know, in the NFL debut of Joe Alt, he shut out Max Crosby, which was just awesome, right? Max Crosby has single-handedly kept the Raiders in games when the rest of their roster had no business being in those games. So I would not be surprised if he gets to Herbert at least once. The Raiders' run defense is stronger than their pass defense. Holding defenses to about 100 rush yards per game is pretty impressive. If Omarion Hampton is not back, this really needs to be a quick passing concept game. It's so important. If Hampton is back, you know, you have a little bit more options. Obviously, Hampton and Vidal are both really good in pass protection, thank God. Really what we need to see is more creative rushing concepts than we saw in Jacksonville. In Jacksonville, everything was really stale, really predictable. Nothing new or interesting was happening there, and that has to change. The run defense is probably the strongest aspect of the Raiders game overall, and that's a good challenge for them to overcome before they go and face tougher teams. If Omarion Hampton returns, that'll open up the short yardage rushing game. That'll allow them to run up the middle more reliably, especially in those third down or, you know, third and goal situations. I would not be surprised if it takes Omarion Hampton a quarter or two to kind of get back in the groove. That's already something we saw from him a bit, and now coming off of an injury, you have to imagine, you know, that hasn't changed. It's also worth noting, this has to be a get-right game for Justin Herbert. He had one of the worst games in his career. I would say the worst game in his career last game in Jacksonville, and obviously, you know, he was under an unbelievable amount of pressure. His receivers weren't doing a good job getting open, but he did take some sacks that he didn't need to take. You know, he had the opportunity to throw the ball away a couple times that he didn't take, so, and he's definitely aware of that, listening to him in the presser, so he's going to want to correct that against one of the weaker defenses, again, before the Chargers go and play the Eagles, who have a much tougher defense. But overall, look, the Raiders allow 25 points per game. They're one of the better fourth quarter defenses, so I think getting an early lead is going to be important. They're similar to the Chargers in that regard. If you want to beat them, you have to get up early. I think it's worth noting that they do have one of the worst special teams units in the entire league. This is an opportunity for Ryan Ficken to get right as well. There are definitely improvements we want to see from him coming out of the bye, especially in return coverage. But also, you know, Darius Davis hasn't looked right. Let's see, maybe he's a little healthier now. Maybe, you know, we can see him play with a little more confidence. So that's a good opportunity for Ryan Ficken, who's having an uncharacteristically bad year. But look, the Chargers are gonna be favored in this game, probably by a lot, probably by a touchdown. This is an opportunity for their defense to get right, for Justin Herbert to get right, to get some momentum going before they play tougher teams, and of course to beat the rival that they take the most pleasure in beating. You know, I always look forward to Raiders Week. It's frightening because it's always an opportunity for Max Crosby to tee off on this offensive line, and for once he's not going up against Joe Alt or Rashawn Slater, so that's frightening. They're going to need a real protection plan. I think the energy will be awesome. Everyone loves the Navy uniforms. It's going to be great. They're going to do all the retro graphics and stuff in the stadium. That's going to be exciting. I will be live streaming after the game. As soon as it ends, I should be up there as long as I can figure that out, and I should be able to. So I'll also answer some questions that you guys have left. So if there's any questions you want me to get to, feel free to type them now if you're not going to be there live. But I'm excited for this one. I think this will be a fun game. If the Raiders win, that is devastating. I'll just say that. So let me know your guys' score predictions. Thank you so much for being here. If you've liked what you've seen, please like and subscribe. It helps me a lot. Really appreciate you guys. Just past 1,000 subscribers. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Cecilia. This has been the Chargers Check-In, and I'll see you guys next time.